right. Cool. Well, thank you all so much for joining today. So, the first class was about basically just building the garden. All the things that we had to do to build a garden. Whether you wanted, do an in-ground garden, which you need soil tests, or if you want to do raised beds, which means you need to buy some materials in your soil, and start ordering those supplies here soon. Or I think we only briefly touched on this, but I think a really great one, like especially if you're like kind of just want to dip your fingers into gardening, you're not sure if you want to like go invest a whole lot of time and effort, is container gardening. We talked a little bit about that, just like buying a couple 5-gallon buckets, buying some potting soil and just planting up some seedlings, and you can keep them on patios, balconies, rooftops. You could even bring them in, use a south facing window. You could get smaller pots for like herbs and strawberries and things for smaller plants. So there's a lot of different options to try, and really it's just about how much you want to invest in, how much you want to all those things. But I think container gardens is a great first step. If you're a little hesitant, and you can just grow a couple plants. And we have a whole 2-hour presentation on container gardening if you want to get some more information on that. But it's a pretty simple. But anyway, so we just talked about how to actually build a garden, and then this class today is going to be about how we actually grow a garden. So how we're going to plan, what plants we're going to pick and choose, when do we plant what plants when. Talk about a lot of easy plants to start out with, and we'll talk about maintenance tips. I'll give you some maintenance tips on how to prune tomatoes and hand pollinate squashes and things like that. And then we'll talk about harvesting and just like some tips on how to correctly harvest, because harvesting is really important. A lot of times it gets skipped, but if you harvest right, you can you'll get a lot more produce, and you can, and a lot of plants you can harvest for months at a time as long as you're doing it just right, instead of just harvesting, pulling the whole plant out for once. So yeah, so we'll dive in. As I was saying, we're going to talk about creating planting plans, planting tips, maintenance tips, and then harvesting tips. So yeah, the first thing about creating a planting plan is you want to make sure you record what you're doing. Don't just rely on your memory. Like yeah, you're not going to remember everything. And this is really important because you can actually see, especially year to year, you can look at your notes, you see what works well, what didn't work well. Eventually, we're not going to talk about this today, but eventually you want to start crop rotating. You want to move your crops around to different spots every year so you don't deplete the soil in the same spot over and over again. So, I mean, having, these plans and then reviewing them, pulling them out in January and February and kind of reviewing them to help you with next year's plans are really helpful. So try, I mean, it doesn't have to be anything too crazy. Just sketch something out, sketch what you plant when and where, or just like a log, just log in, but it's important to have some kind of documentation. It really does help out. It's also important to understand our climate, and how the different growing seasons in DC. So USDA has this, it's called hardiness zones, where they divide all the zones in the world by the climates and like particularly the temperatures and winters and how bad the winters are, and things like that. And so we fall under 7B basically. I think we used to be, when I did this presentation, like I created this slide like a decade ago. We were in 7A. I think we just crossed the 7B over last years, but basically we're 7 is all you really need to know. So 7 is so this yellow area, so kind of follows up, and we even have share some planting some climates with Washington State. But it's kind of sporadic, and but these things do change a little, especially with climate change and things like that. We are changing climates gradually over time, but this is where we're at. We'll probably be at for at least another couple more years, if not longer. So let's see. Okay. And then, but also understanding. So in this climate, in hardiness 7, zone 7, we can actually do 4 different growing seasons. But I mean, typically people only do one season, especially if you're starting out. I recommend just doing a summer season, mainly just waiting to the about mid-May to early June, and then just planting warm weather crops, like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, things like that. I'll show you the chart of the warm weather versus cool weather. And then just growing them until they die, until they die in the fall, and then buying a bag of mulch and covering your garden over the winter. So that's like a great, just easy, beginner garden. We have a very long, a very warm summer that's really great for growing. But eventually, people like try to squeeze in additional growing seasons. Like the next one, the easier one, is like doing a short spring. So that's like from like March to May, planting like greens, kale, collards, lettuce, root crops, things like that, cool weather things that can actually tolerate frost, that won't die. Like a tomato and warm weather plants, like tomatoes and eggplants, if a frost comes, they'll die. But the water in their cells actually explode. They freeze and then they expand and they explode. But cool weather crops, actually they have this really cool technique where they can actually convert starches to sugars because the cells are primarily made of water, so they create sugar water in these cells, and sugar water actually freezes at a lower temperature, so they can actually survive frost. Not only survive it, but they actually get a lot sweeter. Like chard and collards, you can actually grow chard and collards all year long. They do well in the summer, but they're more bitter in the summer, and then in the spring and the fall they're more sweet because of that that frost. So we have a short spring, March to May, and we have a long summer, beginning mid-May. Typically when the soil temperatures get about 70 degrees, which is going to be real soon. We have a long, May to November season, and then we have a short, we can have a short fall ones, but you have to decide. You have to make a choice. Like, do I want to keep on? If my tomatoes are still producing, they'll produce. They'll slow down in the fall because the sunlight and the temperatures, start dropping. But they'll still, slowly produce tomatoes till like, October, November, until the frost comes and kills them. So you can keep it riding that out, or you could cross over right around August. You can rip all of them out, or you could just rip half of them out, and then or a portion of them, and then you could do another short weather, spring, another cool weather season, like plant more kale, collards, things like that, spinach and stuff. And then if you've done it right, and you have some really happy, kale plants and cabbages and broccolis and stuff, around. If they're mature enough around October, you can actually grow them all winter long. You give them like these little hoop structures and stuff, and then they don't grow that much. They slowly grow, but mainly they survive, and you can harvest them throughout the winter. But four season, people do four seasons, but that's you really need to know what you're doing and timing. Like I said, for beginners, I would just recommend doing one long summer season, and then that's great, and maybe if you're ready for a next step, incorporate a spring, and really save the fall and winter for when you feel really confident about your gardening skills, because that takes a little bit of practice to get there. But yeah, just focus on the summer. It's a great way to start out. And so, we've talked about, we have warm weather crops and cool weather crops. So this is a good kind of breakdown of warm weather versus cool weather. So these are all your warm weather crops. These are more typical what people think about, like tomatoes and eggplants and peppers and sweet potatoes, squash plants and stuff. So these, you have no flexibility with your warm weather. If a frost hits any of these, they're going to die. You can do things we talked about, like some people have planted these a little early, and that's fine. You can always provide temporary structures. You can make little mini greenhouses for your seedlings, like cut the bottom out of milk jugs, and then at night, if frost is going to come, you can cover them up at night, because it's really at nighttime that you really have to worry about right now. Because Friday, tomorrow, it is going to get down to like 36, so it's going to be super close to frost, and there's a small chance it could actually freeze. So if you do have some of these things planned out, you might want to think about covering them up on Friday night. But then you have your cool weather things, like your greens and kale and collards and lettuce and like your normal potatoes, spinach. So these are things that there is some flexibility. A lot of these things will grow in the summer. I mean, they may be a little bit more bitter, or if it gets too hot and you're not, on top of your game of watering, they'll bolt, which means they'll flower, and then everything gets bitter and they'll die. But so for the most part, these things really love the spring and the fall. They like cooler temperatures, so they like, so you can plant many of these things starting in March. And the idea is to kind of harvest them by May or June. A lot of people like, like plant them in the fall as well. But there is, a lot of these things will grow throughout the summer. Like I said, like collards and chard are really great at growing in the summer. They're just not as tasty. And then like lettuces, if you plant lettuces behind like a row of tomatoes, give them a little partial shade, they'll grow as well. But they full sun, it's just going to be too hot and they'll bolt, especially around like July. Like a lot of these things will keep them on growing. Like if you still want to plant some of these quicker growing things, you can right now. And the idea of just, you want to harvest them before like mid-June to like July. It's just going to get so hot that a lot of these things aren't going to, survive at that point. So a lot of this, so it can be a little confusing, like when to plant, things, when. There are some really great, calculators out there, garden planting calculators. This is actually from Johnny's Seed Select. It's a really great seed company. It's like a worker-owned co-op. And they're really great at like, if you want to buy bulk, seeds. Like a lot of people will throw in, like they'll have like potluck, seed ordering parties, and they'll all like, order bulk together and then split them up themselves. So it's a great way to get some cheap seeds. But if you go, this is on their website, and basically you just need to you need to look up what our last frost date is. And this is this changes every year, our last frost date. It's actually like, and it's not officially the last frost that's going to happen. It's just like it's like typically like when it's likely not to frost anymore. But there's usually a frost, at least a couple frosts afterwards. But if you look it up, I think this was last year's. It was April 22nd. I think it might be. I looked it up for another class. I can't remember, but if you Google it, DC's last frost date, you'll get a date, and then you plug in that date, and then they'll tell you, exactly when you need to start seeding some of these things indoors, or when you need to start planting them outdoors. So it'll kind of tell you, if you're looking for exact dates, it'll tell you exactly when to plant things and when to expect them to mature, and things like that. So it's a great calendar. But then there's a lot of like other calendars as well that I don't know if I probably should, I can post them towards the end of the class. I can share some of these other calendars that'll kind of help you decide when to plant what. But it's a really great idea to kind of do some research on this stuff, and then maybe make a calendar of like, hey, I'm going to plant my beets this week. I'm going to plant my kale this week. I mean, you don't need to be exact, but just having like a general idea of when to plant things really helps out. And remind me, I'll show you a couple of great calendars for our area as well. So, a question: do the last frost date people keep looking at weather and change the date every week? I mean, it's usually I don't know if it's like the Farmer's Almanac or some organization will figure it out. And it's usually, they'll change it every year, but I don't think they change it throughout the year. At least I'm not aware that they do. So you can look up this year's last frost date, and it tends to change a little bit, if you're in an urban environment versus like a suburb, because of the heat index, all the concrete, warms cities up faster. So someone's asking about the notes. So the PowerPoint, if you look at you go up in the chat, and the first link is for the PowerPoint. I'll repost it. So it's in the Google Drive, so you could download the presentations from this link, and I just posted on the chat box. So another question: what were some of the cool weather plants that can still be planted now? So this is a great, so that's a great intro to this slide. So a lot of things, so this is like this slide kind of shows you that the timing of how long it takes for things to get mature. And these are general estimates. A lot of like different varieties, can change. A lot of things that are happening, like, with the weather can change these, so these are very general. But it also lets you know, there's, the first category, short time. So the, like things like basil and mustard and radishes and dill and stuff like that. These are very fast growing plants. So you can probably get away with planting a lot of these things right now. Cool weather stuff like arugula, greens, because you'll still be able to harvest them before it gets really hot in the summer. So you'll probably be harvesting them in, like, if you plant them now, you'll be harvesting them like mid-June. And then probably July it'll get so hot that they'll start bolting a lot of these things. And then medium, timing, things like, beans, broccoli, cauliflower, tomatoes, summer squash. So some of these things like, the cool weather ones right now, like you can probably plant. Yeah, I mean, you're really risking it. If you're planting, I wouldn't plant broccoli or cauliflower right now. Maybe, collards and kale you could plant right now. But I would avoid, like the bigger things like broccoli and because broccoli and cauliflower do not like it when it gets hot. But kale and collards, I mean, you can keep on harvesting those most of the summer. Like I said, they're just a little bit more bitter. And then a long-term stuff. These are really long season things like artichokes, Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts take a long time. A lot of times people will plant them in the spring and then they'll give them, some partial shade. Like I'll talk later about shade cloth. They'll give them some shade cloth, and keep them well watered over the summer, and then they'll harvest them in the fall. Yeah, they take a long time. We'll talk a little bit more about Brussels sprouts later, but and then onions. Don't ever plant onions by seed. You want to get bulbs or bunches of them or slips. We'll talk more about that today too. But these things take a lot longer to like pumpkins. Like pumpkins, you like plant in June and then you harvest, in the fall, for the pumpkin patches and stuff like that. You could definitely speed things up by buying seedlings, growing your own seedlings, slips, bulbs, things like that. But yeah, this is good to know, like the fast growing versus slow growing, because right now, like I said, you could still probably plant some of the fast growing cool weather things, but I would avoid the long stuff at this point. If you wanted to do cauliflower and broccoli, like you needed to get those in the ground like March, yeah, go forward with that. So a couple questions. What are cutting greens? Did I post that on this slide? Oh, lettuce and cutting greens. Oh, I think I just cut and pasted that from something. So cutting greens are probably like mixed greens. I should update that. Yeah, I was just like probably loose leaf greens is I think what was mentioned. Like yeah, thank you for that. I'm making a note to. That's a weird term. I don't know. I got this. I created this from like 4 or 5 different charts for different timings to try to. But yeah, cutting greens are probably mixed greens that you cut with a knife. We'll talk about that later. Just whatever greens you plant that you intend to cut. Yeah, right. And we're gonna have a whole slide on different ways to harvest greens, so that will make a little bit more sense later. Cool. So now, so hopefully now you're kind of getting an idea of what you can plant now and what you can't plant now. It helps to just do a little research and kind of create a plan, But now I'm going to talk about some easy stuff, So if you're a beginner gardener, there's some easy plants to do and hard plants. Generally, rule of thumb, fast maturing, fast ripening, small things. They may have big plants, but small fruits work really well. And then like big things, like melons and big beefsteak tomatoes and those giant, eggplants. The longer it takes to ripen, the larger the window, the greater chance, some pests or diseases are going to get to it, or you're going to forget to water one, during a drought, or someone's just going to steal it, which happens a lot and it sucks. So I would, think about like smaller things, like root crops, carrots and beets and radishes grow really well. Beans and peas grow really well. I mean, they're so prolific, and one thing I love about beans and peas is like the more you harvest from them, the more it actually produces. lettuces and spinaches are pretty good. Kale and chard are really easy, like big leaf plants. And we'll talk about how to maintain those plants later in this presentation. But then when you think about like tomatoes and peppers and like eggplants and stuff like that, think about smaller varieties like tomatoes. Like I grow mainly cherry tomatoes now. And those are like this is a sun gold. Sun golds are super easy tomatoes. They're super delicious. They're very sweet cherry tomatoes. They're hybrids. They were just designed. I want to say in the last like a decade or so, but I mean they're designed to just be prolific. We get. I mean this is I think this may be one or two, but you just get so many tomatoes. And I think cherry tomatoes are great with little kids because like every day you can go out there with I will go out with my 3-year-old last summer and every day we would eat a handful of cherry tomatoes. And then like like hot peppers, like jalapenos and things like that. The smaller peppers, those big bell peppers. I mean, it's just too long of a window. And I mean, and if you really want to try them, you can. I'm just suggesting like easier things. Not to no, I don't want to dissuade you. I mean, if get the things that you want to eat, but also understand that some of those things you're going to have to monitor more for like pests and diseases. You're going to have to deal protect a little bit more, hide and things like that. Summer squash. So the difference between summer squash and winter squash. So winter squash is like your pumpkins and your gourds and stuff, like the hard rinds. They grow as vines usually, and they take up a lot of room and they all ripen at once in the fall. But summer squash is more like bush-like. There are more giant bushes that for like your yellow squash, zucchini, like the more tender squash, and those things are just prolific. They're really easy to grow and they just produce all summer long. Okra is probably the easiest plant. Okra, I mean, the biggest problem with okra is harvesting them before they grow too big and they get woody. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Strawberries are fantastic. I use a lot of strawberries as like ground cover. So I let them just kind of grow and spread all over my garden because I use like a non-till kind of thing. So instead of like tilling the whole area, I just kind of plug in plants wherever they're needed. But then I have like what's called a living mulch, where I just have tons of strawberries all over, and they protect. They work as a mulch. They kind of keep that moisture in the garden and stuff. And they're just I mean they're super fun when you have little kids. And they're so easy. They spread like crazy, and you can like transplant them and give them as gifts and stuff. It's pretty cool. And then herbs. Herbs are we're going to talk. We'll have a whole slide on really great herbs, but herbs are really fantastic. Like perennial. So difference between annual and perennial. Annuals are things you plant every year. You have like basil and dill and mint, which I'll give you a little caution on mint. Mint can spread like crazy. So if you do mint, I recommend doing it in a container. So it just stays in the night like a 5-gallon bucket or something like that. It's super easy to grow, but I mean the problem is it just grows too much and it'll just take over. Or if you want to plant in your garden, plant like some kind of edging, like a plastic edging to keep it contained because it kind of shoots like runners. I'm actually I should make a side note for that. Just a little cautionary tale on mint. But I mean, mint and containers are fantastic. And it helps with like, pests and diseases, like pests and stuff. It actually helps keep, it disguises different smells that will keep, pests from, smelling your tomatoes. But then perennials are herbs that they establish themselves, and then you don't really have to do much at all. You may occasionally water them once they're established, and they stay there for years. Like some of them could be around for decades, and that's I mean perennials. That's how like half my garden are perennials now, just because it's so. I mean, I have like a 3-month-old and a 3-year-old, and I just don't have a lot of time for gardens. So so I slowly converted into perennials, where I actually have a border. My outside border of my garden is just perennial berry bushes like raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, gooseberries, and then I have lots of perennial herbs like rosemary and lavender and things like that. And then inside the garden, in the middle, is where I plant my annuals, like tomatoes and things like that. And that works out really well. So I definitely recommend, trying to get as many perennials as possible. Let's see. So a couple of things. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so I definitely got some mint comments for sure. So one question, how are these sun gold in the photo supported? So we're going to talk about trellises today. It looks like there's like a cattle fencing. You can barely see it. That goes up to about here. So or maybe they use concrete remesh. We'll talk all about trellises today. Oh, I'll give you lots of examples of different things you can do on trellising. Um, Oh, you know what? You're right. Yeah, mint is actually a perennial. Yeah, I need to redo it. I apologize. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Carol, for mentioning that. Mint is actually a perennial. So I need to move that because it does come back every year. Yeah, definitely put mint in a container. Don't just plant mint straight in your garden because it will dominate. Um, well, so a lot of reasons why I plant the perennials on the outside. One is because it acts like a really windbreak, so it'll break up a lot of the winds, like the harsh winds that will damage my plants. And two, like these things. And yeah, I think the main thing is the windbreak, but also you can't tell that my annuals are inside because they're more tender. They need more protection, and also I just it's hard to kind of, you want to like have designated areas for perennials. When you spread them, that way you can still do mild tilling and things like that. But yeah, mainly for a windbreak is probably the best way. So another question: does rosemary need to be brought in during the cold winters? I had one that survived for a few years and died last winter when it was cold. Yeah, rosemary is definitely yeah, if it's a really bad winter, yeah, which we do have occasionally. We have really bad winters, and a lot of people will lose rosemary. Rosemary typically will survive most winters in this area, but if it's real bad, yeah, it will die. What you can do, I mean, it's really easy. You could dig them up if you want, just not worry about it. Just dig the whole thing up, put it in a 5-gallon bucket, let it dry out, and then just keep it in your basement in the dark, and it'll go dormant. You don't water it or anything like that, and then bring it back out in the spring. Or you could just kind of, you could just monitor the weather. And if you do see like that, we're going to get a really bad winter storm that's going to drop, really low, then you can dig it up, in the moment too, as well. So someone asks, what are some of the best examples for wind breaking plants? Perennials, because perennials, I mean, they're hardier, plants. They have good, because they're every year they're building up their root systems and they're much more stronger. Brambles are really great. Like raspberries and blackberries, they grow in like this. A lot of people use them as hedges. But they're great. Stalk plants. They grow and they have lots of like what we call canes. So I think raspberries and blackberries are really great border perennial plants. And then like some of your larger I mean like lavender and rosemary and a lot of these plants they will eventually get really big. Like lavender can get really big. So that works as a really great windbreak. Oh, so someone says, why is corn not on your list? What is the problem with growing corn? I mean, the problem with corn, it's actually, if you start early enough, it's pretty good. Like the whole thing is like knee high by July, and it's pretty easy to grow. And I've grown corn a couple times in gardens, but the main reason is people nag. You only get 1 to 2 ears per stalk, and it's almost always stolen before. I mean, if you have a nice protective area, I think corn works really well. You do need to like kind of is wind pollinated. So sometimes you need to kind of hand pollinate them. Oh, I think we'll talk about that later. So the pollination, unless you're growing a lot of corn, the pollination can be a little tricky. Yeah, corn's pretty easy. I just don't think it's very efficient unless you have a lot of land. I mean, it's a nice, cool thing to grow, for a couple of years, but it just takes up so much space. Yeah, I mean, but it is easy to grow. I agree with you. Corn is very easy to grow. So another question: what about lemons? Would those be good to plant? So you don't want to plant lemons in the ground. Well, you can, but you want to take them inside during the winter because lemon trees are tropical, lemon and lime trees. And they'll die in the winter. But I have a lemon and lime plant. I have them both in a 5-gallon bucket, and I bring them out in the spring, and I let them, and they do really great throughout the summer. And then I bring them to my basement and let them go dormant in a dark basement during the winter. But yeah, lemons and limes. I mean, especially they work really well as container plants. But I mean, you can plant them in the ground. You just got to dig them up. Like a lot of people like bananas. I've seen a couple of people successfully grow bunches of bananas in the greater DC area, especially like Hyattsville. There's a couple of folks doing it. But they dig them up in the winter and bring them indoors so they don't die from the frost. All right. So how about figs? Yeah, figs is the same. Well, figs. So we have a whole fruit tree class if you want to check them out. Figs though. A lot of times the tops will die back in the winter, but the root systems will survive. But then they'll grow back like more like shrubs, and than actual trees. But they do well. The hardest part about figs is they have this like it just takes forever sometimes for them to ripen, and in the meantime you have birds and things eating them. But yeah, figs are. I mean, I think yeah, figs are pretty great. They're really yeah, I mean, there's not really any disease issues or anything like that. It's mainly just like, birds, and you can net them. You can net the trees if you keep them small. They're really great container plants too, if you want to keep them in a 5-gallon bucket and bring them inside during the winter. But yeah, figs are great, awesome. Yeah, definitely check out if you're thinking about figs and lemon trees. Check out our fruit tree class. We talk a lot about those. All right, and then the second thing that I was talking about is, especially if you're in community gardens or you're planting in your yard and it's not like completely fenced off or something, you're going to have some theft. It's just a natural thing that happens. But there's a lot of plants you can choose that will decrease that, or even like not happen at all. So the one thing I've noticed over the last decade of urban ag is that big things always get stolen first. It's so sad. I always see this in every community garden. There's someone that's growing melons. They're so excited. They're getting these melons are getting so big, but then like a week before they ripen, they disappear, and it's just devastating. So in like large tomatoes, like beefsteaks and stuff like that, big peppers, big eggplants, corn, always a lot of that stuff. It's just it's easy, people notice it because it's taking so long. It's just out there, in the open. So that's why growing things that ripen quickly, where you can actually harvest them, before anyone notices them. They're even out, like cherry tomatoes, mini eggplants, like Asian eggplants, are they really thin? And they grow really quickly. Jalapenos, okra, greens, root crops. I mean, like not everyone knows what a root crop is. The tops of root crops are. So, potatoes and sweet potatoes. And then I really like these. Some of the more heirloom tomatoes and stuff. Like this is a green zebra. And it actually ripens when it's green. So people walking by don't know this stuff. Maybe waiting for this to turn red before they're going to nab it, and then you're actually harvesting them before they turn red. So it's really cool. And then there's a lot of like heirloom tomatoes like that ripen when they're black or different colors, or will help you out too as well. But yeah. And then it's good to there's an approach to gardening called holistic gardening, where you try to build like healthy ecosystems where you have this like balance where there's like good bugs that come in and eat your bad bugs, and then like everything's like more healthy, and what help and have good pollination and things like that. And what really helps that is like designating about quarter of your garden, give or take, to herbs and flowers. Native flowers particularly, because that's going to attract the bugs that you want. That's going to create this nice ecosystem with you. So there's perennial herbs. There's a lot of fantastic perennial herbs out there. So I did properly label mint as a perennial herb on this slide. But like and some of these things, like lemon balm and lemongrass, they need to come inside in the winter because they're tropical plants. But I have a lemongrass plant perennial in a container that I bring indoors. That grows really, really well. And then like cool weather, like if you're thinking about doing herbs in the spring, like cilantro and dill and things like that, parsley. Parsley is a biennial, so parsley is difficult because it takes weeks for it to germinate. A lot of times, it's not really ready to go until the next year. But warm weather like basil, I messed that up. Bor is just actually a cool weather. I apologize, but some of these slides need to be updated. But chamomile and savory and things like that are warm weather stuff. So it's good just to have, these make great border plants as well. If you're looking to plant these plants around the border, and that will help kind of windbreaks and things like that. And then and then here's some great examples of native flowers. So it's good because to have these things, because We're going to talk about bugs and good and bad bugs later in this presentation. So like things like aphids and stuff will eat your plants. And then like if you attract like ladybugs, you know, they'll eat up all your aphids, and then you don't even have to worry about them. You can actually buy ladybugs in a little container, like buy like 100 of them, and it's a fun activity. Like you can get kids to kind of help like spread them around the garden. You want to do that right when the sun's setting, and then they'll stick around. They'll eat up all the bad bugs, but then if there's no actual native plants that are providing nectar, they're just going to fly away once they're done with your bugs. And those aphids are going to come back, and there's not going to be any ladybugs. So you want to create habitats, you know, where things can actually they can actually, you know, they'll set up home, and the aphids will actually make a home in your garden and will lay eggs, and then they'll actually reproduce. And that's just this natural, like, you know, way to deal with pests. So there's some really great examples of some really great annual flowers and perennial flowers and things like that if you want to do research and try to figure out which ones you want. Oh yeah, holistic. Sorry. And then yeah, fennel seems to come every year. Yeah. I've never really tried fennel, but fennel, yeah, is oh, you're trying to say, is that like a perennial? I think it reseeds itself. You know, some of these annuals, you know, they feel like perennials because they're kind of, because they do reseed themselves, but I don't know if that's fennel's an actual perennial. I think it's more an annual that reseeds. But yeah, I'll double check that. I love fennel though. All right, so hopefully that gives you some kind of idea in the next week or so. I mean, I would recommend trying, you know, creating your planting plan, trying to figure out which plants you want to plant, you know, checking out, you know, seed catalogs and things like that, and trying to create an idea. You know, a good thing to do like this week is create, especially this weekend, is create a game plan of how you're going to plant, you know, over the next couple of weeks. But then, so now hopefully, if you once you have that game plan, we're going to talk about planting tips. Some tips on how to actually plant. And a lot of times, I mean, when you're buying seeds, everything, all the information you need is on the back of a seed packet. You know, it'll tell you like how deep you need to plant your seeds. Most seeds, though, typically you want to plant them twice as deep as the how you know width they are. So if you know have big seeds like beans and corn, you plant those kind of deep. But then you have small seeds like carrot seeds. Those are gonna not be deep at all. But they'll tell you like these are carrots. You know, carrots need to be like a quarter to a half inch deep. It'll tell you about spacing. So a lot of times with carrots, like you dig a trench and then you just sprinkle the carrot seeds in there and then let them all grow, and then you thin them out, you know, eventually. So that so spacing, you know, you may not plant things by the spacing, but eventually, like you need to thin them out so that each carrot is 2 inches, you know, spaced. That way, because carrots, I mean, they'll get 2 inches in diameter, so you want to give them proper room to actually grow and mature. Um, so, you know, and it'll tell you about how long it's going to take to germinate, you know, plant heights and things like that, whether they need full sun or partial shade. So a lot of your information is on the back of the seed packet. But then, including some important information like germination rates and things like that. So germination rates, that's is the probability that seed's going to germinate and start growing. They have to, by law, like all seeds have to be like upper 90%. Like you should be guaranteed, like, yeah, every seed, you know, 98 out of 100 of those seeds should, you know, be sprouting. So that's why you only need to put 1 seed per hole when you buy seeds right away. But then if you store seeds, you know, you want to store them in dry, you know, cool areas like, you know, glass containers and Ziploc bags, things like that. But when you store them, that germination rate goes down every year, and it may be 75%, you know, second year, you know, and then 50% the third year. So, and after about 5 years, they're just not going to really germinate. So that's a good idea if you're using, second year seeds. You maybe want to put 2 seeds per hole, just to make sure something comes up. And if both seeds come up, you just thin them out. And that's also a really good thing to know, because seed companies aren't really allowed to sell seeds that are second year or 2 years old. They can only sell first year seeds, but they usually have tons of leftover seeds from the year before. So if you write to them or email them and say, a lot of times they'll send you free, seeds from last year. A lot of times you have to be like a school or a nonprofit, or you have to pay for shipping or something like that. But it's a great way to get a lot of great seeds. But most of what you really want to plant, I'll show you a slide of what needs to be planted direct seeded and what needs to be planted by seedlings in a second. But most of what you're going to be planting are need to be with seedlings, or we also call them transplants. So these are baby veg plants that have been grown in greenhouses or in your basement under grow lights, for the last couple of months. So some of these things they don't always come with instructions, so you may want to you can Google them and see like what the spacing are. You can always ask the nursery people, like, how should I space these? And they'll know. Or you can just research them. But when you're buying these seedlings, yeah, you definitely want to research like mainly the spacing, like how you want to space them out. But then when you're buying them, there's some things you want to look for. Typically, the most for herbs and stuff, like this is looks like a Thai basil. So it's okay to have a couple stalks coming out, but you don't want to plant all three of them in the same hole. You actually want to like very gently with your fingers kind of like break apart this whole pot into like three different plants. Like it should be one stem per hole. And that's fine, but sometimes there's just like, and they overcrowd this, and there'll be like 10 things coming out one little 2-inch cell, and like don't buy those because they're just not going to be that healthy. They've been overcrowded. A lot of times, if you can, try to pull the seed out of the container. If it falls apart, definitely don't buy it. They shouldn't be selling anything that doesn't have a stable root ball. But you want to look for a root ball that's just got some root growth. But if it's something like this, that's been in the container too long. They should have potted it up. They should have put it into a new container, but they didn't. And so the root growth is just it's unhealthy root growth. It's just been going around in circles, and it's not going to do well. But if you do buy some seedlings and you find out you do have that, what you want to do is just kind of tease it all out with your fingers. You can even take a pruners and kind of prune them out. And you want to tease it all the roots. You want to tease them out so they're just like hanging, so they're not growing in circles anymore. And then plant it like that, and that will help you out. But you're looking for like short and stout ones. You don't want like super tall seedlings that are leggy. That you want like short and stout. And don't buy things that have fruits in them already. Like I used to do that. Buy tomatoes that already have little baby tomatoes, and I'm thinking I was like halfway there. But that just sucks up a lot of energy from the root system. You want these plants to focus on their root system before they start growing fruit. So this is a good list. So this is a list of things that you direct seed, which is basically you take buy the seeds and you plant directly in the ground, and then everything else that's not on this list, for the most part, you want to if possible, buy seedlings, or grow your seedlings yourselves. Just basically like for things like tomatoes, if you plant a tomato seed in the ground in mid-November or mid-May when it's warm enough, I mean you may get some tomatoes by the end of the summer. But if you put a nice healthy tomato seedling in the ground when it's warm enough in mid-May, you're gonna start harvesting tomatoes by the end of June. So it's you really get a lot more production when you try to when you plant a lot more seedlings. But certain things like beans and peas, you can plant those. You can buy them by seedlings. Places definitely sell them by seedlings, but they just grow so quickly. I just think it's kind of a waste of money to when you could buy like a package of like 50 seeds for like $2, or you could buy each individual seedling for like $3. So I just think like legumes, and cucurbits, like your squashes and cucumbers and zucchini, you can buy those. It's not the work, it's all right. It's just they just grow so quickly. I just recommend planting them by seed. Corn does not transplant well at all. You want to always plant corn by seed. Root vegetables don't transplant, very well. You don't want to disturb their root system, so you plant those by seeds. And like lettuces and stuff, they just grow so quickly. So the blue stuff are cool weather, and the red it's some warm weather. But then everything else, I mean, some herbs and flowers and stuff you can still plant by seeds. But everything else, like veggie wise, you want to try to get seedlings or try to grow your own seedlings, like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, things like that. You want to get seedlings when possible. And then the best time to plant. So you never really want to plant like in the hottest part of the day, particularly when it starts warming up, like around noon. You want to either plant in the morning or evening, or like look for a cloudy day. Cloudy days are the best times to plant because basically you're going to be, especially if it's seedlings, you're going to be exposing some of these seedlings, the root systems to the sun. And even if it's just for, 10, 15 seconds, like it's going to, shock your plants, and it's going to have what's called transplant shock, which is just, it's when your seedlings struggle to kind of adapt to your garden. So planting them early in the morning or planting them in the afternoon, is the best. Just kind of avoid that noon area. And the same goes with like watering and harvesting. You don't want to, like, if you water the hottest part of the day, all your water is going to like evaporate, so you want to, water if possible in the morning or like an hour before sunset. If possible, try to avoid watering at night, just because, or if you do, just be really careful just to water the soil, because you could get some mildews and stuff. I mean, yeah, like things happen, like you have a life, you can't always water in best time. So it's all right if you occasionally water at night. I water at night whenever I have a bad day and I can't get to the garden. But and typically you want to try to water in the mornings or an hour before sunset if possible. But yeah, a lot of these things, like I said, are just suggestions, and suggestions don't always work out in the real world. So and then like best time to harvest. Yeah, definitely don't harvest things, and when it's the hottest point of the day, because then like your lettuce is just going to shrivel up really quickly before which you can bounce it back by putting in ice water, but it's still it'll just be temporary. You got to eat it that day. Try to harvest things in the morning or in the evening if you can. So a couple questions. Are lettuce seeds from 2016-17 still okay to use? Well, you're pushing it. I would probably. I think it's worth trying. I would definitely overseed. If you're doing individual holes, put 3 or 4 seeds per hole. Or if you're doing like a trench and you're sprinkling, just sprinkle a lot of those seeds in there, because yeah, they're getting close to probably not germinating, but they still might. So some seeds will last a lot longer than 5 years, but you don't know. So another question: plant seeds in dry soil, then water when? Oh, that's a good question. Oh, and thank you for pointing that up. So you don't want to never plant in your garden when it's wet soil, like after a big harsh rain, because the reason that being is when you plant your stuff, it's just you're gonna probably step in your garden every once in a while. And if it's wet soil, it's really going to compact your soil. So you want to kind of avoid doing a lot of things in your garden when the soil is really wet. You want to so plant your things and then water your soil, or just don't water, don't plant, on a rainy day. Like we were actually going to plant some things this Friday, but it looks like there's like a 60% chance it's going to rain. So we postponed to Monday when there's less of a chance. And then, so he said, what is sunset for you? Well, I mean, that's just, yeah. The idea is, yeah, I mean, really, I would just avoid noon, around, give or take a couple hours. So maybe you can water, like maybe water around 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or if possible, but the idea is you want to at least have an hour before sunset. So that way, things can dry, your tops of your plants will dry up before nighttime, where they could get some mildews. But like I said, it's not that a huge issue if you have to do that. Yeah. And then sunset, you can look up sunset. Sunsets are different, throughout the year, so it changes. I mean, every day. But like right now, I don't know. Was it like, maybe I don't even know right now, but like maybe like 7:38. But in the prime of summer, it'll be even later. So I overseeded my 2019 seedlings in the seedling starter tray, but putting an average of 3 to 5 seeds for all my plants, which I do now. In this. So I mean, you're fine. Most likely, when you overseed seeds, you'll just have a lot more coming up. You have 2 options. If you overseeded a seedling tray, you can either thin them out. You want to wait till the second leaves. We'll have a whole slide on thinning, but you want to wait till the second leaves appear, or the first. These are called the first true leaves. So when the first leaves that actually look like the plant, because the first leaves that come up, they're called cotyledon leaves. They don't look like anything that you would recognize. But then second leaves are the the actual carrot leaves or the kale leaves or whatever. And at that point, you could decide which ones are the best looking ones, and then you can take some scissors and cut out all the additional ones. Or like I said, if it's not too crowded, you can actually grow them all out, and then when you're ready to plant, you just kind of tease the root balls and break them apart with your hands very gently, and then plant them all in their own unique hole. Yeah, so here it says, so plant in dry soil, then after sowing seeds in water. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's not the worst thing if it's water. It's mainly like after like a big rain. Like you don't want to plant in your garden when it's raining or right after a big rain. And that could be different if you have a raised beds, because you're not actually stepping into your garden. But especially if you have an in-ground garden, you don't really want to walk around there when it's wet because you're going to compact the soil really bad. And then someone asks, when fruits and vegetables do very well in large containers like or what fruits and vegetables do very well in large containers like 5 to 10 gallon? Like everything, like 5 gallon is like a great cutoff point, So, yeah, like everything, like like one tomato, one pepper, pepper, eggplants, things like that. Mainly with containers though, you want short, stout, bush like veggies. Like if you're doing like peas and beans, you want to get the bush varieties. Or if you're doing squash, you want to get summer squash. Or if you're doing tomatoes, get the determinate tomatoes. The ones that are like short. There's a great slide in the last presentation on Tuesday's presentation talking about what kind of varieties work best in containers. And then like I said, I have a whole 2-hour class that's recorded on the Doug Network webinar page about containers, where we really go into depth about like what plants do well. But mainly, if you have smaller containers than 5 gallons, like smaller containers, you're really limited on doing things like strawberries and small herbs and greens. But about 5 gallon or bigger, you can do anything you want in that. All right, and then some things like tomatoes. There's a trick to build bigger root balls. So the most important part of your plant is the root ball. That's really what's going to really make your plant healthy and blow it up. So and a lot of times when you get tomatoes, they're big. If you don't have, if you're not grown in greenhouses that have lots of fans and stuff, they're pretty leggy. So with tomatoes, the great thing about tomatoes, like any part of the plant, if you bury it, will just become a root ball. So I really recommend with tomatoes, and then like some things that are just too leggy, you can plant them a little bit deep. But this is mainly for tomatoes. You plant them, you bury them, about halfway to 2/3 of the plant, which looks sad at first because you're like, oh yeah, this beautiful tomato plant, and you're burying most of it. But what that's going to do is over the next week or so, all that part is going to blow up into this massive root ball, and then your tomato is just going to take off, and then it's going to be so much bigger than someone if you just plant it at level. So I definitely recommend plant your tomatoes at least like halfway in the ground up to the stalk, depending on how big it is. And then if you have like small containers that don't do well, you can actually put them on the side and bend them up a little bit to fit them in. But that really help really awesome for tomatoes to do. Yeah, you really have some healthy tomatoes with that. So we got a question: if you sow yarrow or chamomile and they are tiny and really dense seedlings, do you need space to space them out so that they grow bigger? Last year they stayed tiny, maybe because they were too densely seeded. Yeah, I've never really planted yarrow or chamomile, but I imagine, yeah, they should, yeah, they should be thinned out. But I don't really know, spacing wise. I would definitely like Google that and try to figure out, yeah, what's the recommended spacing for those plants. But yeah, you definitely want to space them out, or they're just not going to ever get big. All right, and now we're going to move into like maintenance tips. And the first one is really important to understand: pruning indeterminate tomatoes. So the reason why we prune indeterminate tomatoes is one, like you'll get a lot healthier plants, you'll avoid a lot of plant diseases, and yeah, it's just a much healthier, and you get a lot more fruit. So first thing is understanding the difference between indeterminate and determinate tomatoes. So D-determinate tomatoes are tomatoes that you don't even need to trellis. They're nice little bush compacted, like Roma tomatoes or Ruggers. They only grow about 3 to 4 feet tall, and then they ripen all at once. Within a couple weeks. And you're like overwhelmed with tomatoes. But luckily, a lot of these tomatoes they're really good canning tomatoes and sauce tomatoes. A lot of people will process them, and they don't necessarily eat them all fresh. And those don't even need to be don't really need to be pruned. They're really easy plants, and those plants determinate tomatoes work really well in containers. But indeterminate tomatoes, those are tomatoes that will just keep on growing until the frost hits them and kills them. And they'll get like 6, 7 feet tall. I mean, they can get huge, especially some of these hybrids like Sun Golds, are just like, so prolific. But the thing is they're like, if you don't trellis them and you don't prune them, if you don't trellis them, they'll just grow along your ground. And you don't want to do that because there's a lot of like diseases, tomato diseases that live in the soil, like blights and wilts. So if they grow along the ground, they're just going to be constantly infected with different, diseases and stuff, and it's going to be really unhealthy. So the idea is you want to get them, trellis them, and we'll talk about a lot of different trellises that you can do later in this presentation. But at the same time, they're just so prolific that they grow so many leaves that what happens is there's a lot of moisture that stays inside, and then you'll get a lot of like fungal issues and things. And the fruits won't develop very well. So you want to prune them basically to look like a tree with like one single stalk, main stalk. Some people will do two main stalks, but I just do one single stalk and then a bunch of branches growing outward. The idea is you want to kind of open it up and prune it so more sunlight and circulation gets into the middle of the tomato plant. And then you just have a much healthier tomato plant, happier, better fruiting, things like that. You don't have to worry about diseases and things like that when you do this. So how do you do it? Basically, you want to grow them first until you start seeing flowers. You start seeing, usually about 1.5 feet. Sometimes you'll get flowers earlier. I would recommend pulling those flowers off until your plant is about at least 1 foot or so, until it's getting, and then once those flower, you want to snap off all the branches below the flowering. The reason being is for some reason those will never produce fruit. I don't really understand it. I just know that's how it works. And then they'll start growing so long they'll start touching the ground. And again, that's a place for diseases to come back into the plant. So you want to snap these guys off. Usually with tomatoes, you could snap them off. If a branch gets too big, you might need some pruners. And then from there, you want to look for what's called suckers. So in the armpits of each one of these branches will be another small branch that will grow. Like it's called a sucker. And you want to get to these guys early. So like I check them like after I plant. I mean, every time I go and water, I'll check my tomatoes for suckers, and they're really easy to pull out. You just with your fingers just pull it out. Because if you let them grow, it's just going to be this mess of green growth, and it's just going to, like I said, you're not going to have sunlight and circulation, and it's just going to be a lot of issues. So you want to like just keep on doing that and keep on pulling the suckers, basically every week till eventually I kind of like probably midsummer or so I just let it grow. It's good, especially for like the first month or so. You want to pull all these suckers out just to kind of build a healthy structure for your tomato plant. Right. Yeah. And then thinning now. So we talked a lot about thinning. So a lot of times, I mean, like, yeah, you may just like miscalculate it and plant things too closely. You maybe have to thin them out. You can transplant them, things like that. But a lot of things, they're designed to be thinned out. A lot of it, like smaller seeds, like the root crops, like carrots and things like that. Lettuces and stuff. They're designed um, so like you plant them densely, and then once the first true leaves coming out, then you need to thin them out to the proper spacing. So like carrots, how you plant carrots is you just dig a trench. I used to use like the upside down the handle of my shovel, and I'll just like make a trench, a very shallow trench, and then you just sprinkle carrot seeds along this trench, and then lightly put the soil back over, and then they'll sprout like crazy. And I wait till again the first true leaves. So the first leaves that come up are condylen leaves, so they don't look like anything. But then the second leaves are what so they actually look like carrot tops. So the second leaves, by that point, they're the seedlings established. So you can kind of decide which ones are going to be healthy, which ones aren't healthy. And you can, so you have a couple options. You can go in there, the easiest way, and this is what most people do, is they just grab scissors. Carrots like to be spaced out every 2 inches. So I just go in there and I'll cut out like 90% of these carrots. Just space them out every 2 inches. And then that's one way. And then another way, you could transplant them, get like a spoon or something, very gently move them around. If you have it, I mean, it's very meticulous, and but it's a great way to kind of if you have more space, you could transplant a lot of these little guys to different parts of your garden to keep on growing. Another way people will do, they'll thin this out. Instead of thinning this out all at once, they'll thin it out over a week or two, and they'll slowly kind of harvest these guys. Like these are beet tops. Beet tops make really great microgreens. So you can slowly just harvest a little bit at a time and then mix eat that in your salads. Microgreens, I mean, they're baby leaves that have a lot of nutrition. They're really healthy for you. And then over like a span of a week or two, you're slowly thinning them out. So there's a couple of different ways to thin, but it's really important to give your plants the proper spacing. So question, you say to snap of flowers below what point? Okay, so back to tomatoes. So the first flowering branch on the tomato, then you want to go underneath and you want to cut, snap off all the branches below your first flowering branch. Because they just, they'll grow along the ground, they'll be a vector for diseases, and they won't produce fruit. So all the fruiting branches are going to be above that first flowering branch. All right. And then a big, tip, you want to avoid overwatering, which is unfortunately, I think, we probably kill more plants overwatering than underwatering, which, I mean, you want to be careful not to underwater as well. But a lot of times they both look at, very similar conditions that are happening. Like they both start getting, droopy, yellowing, brown, of leaves. So some people will think that they're underwatering and will actually keep on overwatering, especially with indoor plants. That's the #1 way that we kill plants indoors, is overwatering them, because you're pushing out all the oxygen in the soil, and the plants and the roots just basically drown and start rotting. So a good indicator is you want to sometimes you have to, again, like sometimes you're just busy, you're going away for the weekend, you just got to water it one last time, before you really heavily. That's fine, but you just want to make a practice where you want to kind of check the soil moisture with your finger, go a couple inches down, and if the soil is really moist, you don't want to water it again. You want to let it kind of dry out, allow oxygen to get back in there, and then rewater it. But you don't want to wait too long. You don't want to let it dry it out for a couple of days, because your plants aren't going to survive. But you want to let it out, let it dry out a little bit for a day and then rewater it. So that can look differently. Like, in the spring, I mean, like I water my garden maybe like, twice a week in the spring, because the water, will stay wet. But in the summer, like my garden's like drying out every day, so I may need to water every day. So it's just like, you just gotta, check the temperature and just, monitor it. And then if you mulch, we're going to talk about mulch. Mulch will also keep that moisture, keep your garden from, the water from drying up, and that will buy you a lot more time. So like I mulch heavy in the summer as well, and when I do, I may go down to like watering twice a week again with a heavy mulch. So just something to think about, trying to understand, like how quickly your soil dries out, and try to get on some kind of watering pattern. But like I said, again, but I mean, you don't have to be perfect. Like if you're going away for the weekend and your soil is wet, it's okay to like water it extra that day. You just don't want to make a practice and do it every day, every week, because then you're going to get some root rots. And then mulching. So mulching, I think, is like the best thing you could do for a low maintenance garden. Just putting a good, layer of mulch, like 2 to 3 inches of mulch. Don't make it any more than 2 or 3 inches, or they'll stop, prevent water from getting to the soil. But like straw works really well. Shredded bark works really well. Living mulches, using like white clover, like seeding white clover, that doesn't compete too much against your plants. So, and it's a nitrogen fixer, so it actually sucks nitrogen from the air and deposits into the soil. So all legumes do that: beans, peas, clover, peanuts, things like that. they work really well. I mean, one, it adds nutrients. It keeps your it keeps your soil temperature and moisture consistent. Which there's a lot of like things like calcium deficiencies and blossom end rots that occur from when your soil temperatures aren't consistent. But mainly it just reduces the amount you have to water. Like I mulch really heavily in like July and August. And then like so I you know, because I don't want to water more than like 2 or 3, you know, because right when July and August is when the mosquitoes come out, and it's just like you don't want to spend too much time, and you know, yeah, that will really reduce how much you have to water. And like yeah, especially like tomatoes. Like a lot of times when you have bare soil, when it rains, it'll splash that soil into your tomato plants, and then you'll get like diseases and stuff. And you know, so you just yeah, I definitely recommend at least straw. Straw is the best for your garden, if not like shredded wood, you know, chunkier stuff. I would avoid like straight up wood chips. Like wood chips are great for like paths. You know, like for my paths, I'll lay down cardboard and then put wood chips on top, and that'll keep the weeds at bay. But they're so carbon heavy. Um, you know, you got if you don't understand composting, like composting is when you mix carbon and nitrogen sources together to kind of break down, track bacteria breaks it down. A lot of times when we put fresh carbon sources like wood chips that want to break down, they'll actually will pull up nitrogen from your garden. They'll eventually put it back once it breaks down. But yeah, I just wouldn't use wood chips for your actual garden. And then avoid dyed mulches, things like that. Hay, most of the time when you get like straw bales, straw is hay's for horses, straws for people. Hay is when you come across like a wild field and you cut all the grass down. It's got seeds, and they feed that to horses because the seeds have protein. Straw is like a farm grain like barley, where you chop off all the seeds and then you're left with stalks, and that's what you use for like mulching and stuff like that. But if you do mulch, you may have some slug issues. So if you see some, you know, they only come out at night. You won't see them during the day. But if you see your leaves are being chewed on, you may have slugs. But slugs are super easy to take care of. Like beer traps work really well. Or just putting a headlamp on and going out in the middle of the night and just doing some squishing. It's a great way to deal with slugs. Uh, let's see a couple of things. A couple questions. Yeah, rain affects your water schedule for sure. Yeah, if it's raining a lot, yeah, you don't actually, yeah, incorporate that into your schedule. Um, at what point do you mulch? A certain time in the summer or when the plants are close to harvest? I mulch right away. I try to keep all my soil covered as all possible. Like if you're not going to do a winter garden, it's good to like buy a couple bags of shredded bark mulch and just cover your garden, and then in the spring, I'll buy some extra mulch and I'll replant everything. I'll probably use straw in the spring. Yeah, I try to keep a consistent layer of mulch in my garden at all times, even during the winter. So there's not really any best time to do mulch, but if you haven't mulched, I'd recommend. Yeah, it's nice to do it right when you first plant. Especially if you're like seeding things, if you do a really thin layer of straw, that will keep it, the birds from eating your seeds and things like that. And then once they get more mature plants, that's when we can start doing a heavier layer. So let's see. What about shredded leaves for mulch or pine needles? Yeah, so if you have a lawnmower that shreds in bag stuff, I mean that's a really great mulch to use. I like that mulch a lot. So you can use that mulch. You just want to shred it. You don't want to put a bunch of unshredded leaves on your garden because it gets matted and creates anaerobic situations when they're wet. Pine needles, maybe avoid that because they're acidic. I mean, pine needles are good for like ornamental mulches, but I wouldn't put pine needles into your garden. Squish slug doesn't make more slugs. Like when you break earthworms, they grow back into more, supposedly. Yeah, no, I don't think that's the same. I think when you squish a slug, they're squished. What's a good place to buy straw? Some products seem really processed. Yeah, straw is a little bit tough. There used to be this guy that did this like straw collective where he bought a bunch of organic straw from his farm, and then everyone showed up to his garden, and like, yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, just like, garden nurseries, garden stores. Nurseries will have clean straw for you. Hope Depot, places like that. A lot of construction sites will have extra leftover straw, but you want to like ask them to make sure that it wasn't used to like soak up like toxic materials or something. But yeah, straw. I mean, yeah, I haven't really found a great source of straw, but yeah, for sure, I get most of my straw from like garden stores and hardware stores. Um, See a couple more questions. Okay, will the mulch disintegrate over the winter for more planting in the spring? Yeah, all mulch will slowly break down and actually add organic matter, and it will fertilize your garden. So it's a very slow release form of composting. Have tulips planted now, almost done. If I put a new layer of topsoil, can I use same bed? Yeah, for sure. You can for sure use it. Your same bed. A lot of times you don't even have to wait for the tulips to be done. You could just like plant like small, quick growing things around the tulips. And you can top dress it with compost. Or you can wait till you rip out all your tulips, add some compost, till everything, and then plant a whole new garden. Um, Straws free at University of Maryland if you get 20 bales. Well, yeah, bales, yeah, that's a lot, but that's good to know. Yeah, I would love that. I mean, if you can email me that contact, that'd be good to like try to organize some people to do like a bulk purchasing of straw bales. All right. Okay, cool. All right, so trellising. So you want to try to trellis as many things as possible. One, it's going to save you space in your garden, and you're going to have healthier plants because you get them off the ground, you give them circulation, things like that. So there's certain things that you don't need to do anything. You just need to put a trellis structure up, and they'll grow, and they'll actually like they'll grow in these, and they do these circles, and they'll loop in, and they'll climb on your trellis, like peas and beans and cucumbers and melons. Like you just set up a structure system, a trellis, and then plant them on the bottom, and they'll grow right into your trellis. It's pretty cool. But then there's other things that need a little bit more help that they can't grab as well, and like tomatoes and pumpkins and stuff. Like you need to like tie them off, and you can use like any kind of string. Or I really like this Velcro reusable tie. The main thing is you don't want to tie them tight because you're going to cut off the circulation. You want to give it some room to grow into it. But there's a lot of different options for trellising. Easy options, just getting these like little like 4-foot tomato cages, and they're nice. Eventually, a lot of indeterminate tomatoes are going to outgrow these tomato grit cages. So that's why a lot of people will make their own tomato cages. And I think that's what that person did in that Sun Gold picture a while ago. I think they made their own cage. A really great material to make it out of is called concrete remesh. You can get this at like if you go to Home Depot in the concrete aisle. You can find these in sheets. They're like $1 or $2 per sheet. They're pretty cheap. They're used to like kind of to drop into concrete foundations to kind of build stronger structures. But you can bend them really easy. You can bend them into a circle. Some of them are like you can get them 4 feet, 6 feet tall. The holes are big enough where you can actually shove your hand through. That's why you want to be careful not to use like cattle fencing and things like that where you can't actually get your hand through the hole. So you want stuff that's got big enough holes. And it's basically you just make it into a circle, and then like they'll have one end that'll be pokey, and you just bend back the pokey end and just like clamp it down. And that stuff works really great. I really love tomato cages made out of concrete remesh. Another thing though is a lot of people use bamboo. Bamboo, I mean, it's just so plentiful. I mean, if you have bamboo, like it's invasive, you can't get rid of it. There's constantly people on local listservs being like, please come and cut my bamboo down. So you can definitely find lots of bamboo in the area. And you could do a thing like this I really like this for like this is called a pea teepee, where or bean teepee, where you actually you put a bunch of them together, tie the top, and then you spread them out. Push them a little bit into the garden, and then take a string and wrap that string around it, and then you just plant a bunch of peas on the bottom, and then they'll just grow, and they just love climbing that trellis. Some people, even with little kids, they'll leave an opening so kids can hang out in the middle. But it's cute picture, but then they're gonna compact your soil. But as long as you don't care that much, it's pretty cool. And then you can do lots of different, structures with bamboo too as well. This is a nice one where you make big pieces in bamboo, you make cross braces, and then you have little ones coming down, and beans and peas can grow up that. tomatoes, there's just so many different ways that you can do tomatoes. The easiest way, just getting bamboo and just shove it as far as you can down into the ground right next to a tomato plant. And then as that tomato plant grows up, you just keep on tying the main stalk to the plant. The problem with some of this is like tomatoes will get so heavy that sometimes they may fall over. So you may need to like tie some cross braces to them, which I'll show you another picture in a second of what that looks like. This is what I use. This is my favorite trellis. It's where you create some kind of structure or some, and then you attach strings to the end. And then you pull the strings down and you don't actually tie them to the tomato. You just pull them down and you wrap them around the stalk of the tomato. And tomatoes have these little fibers that will actually latch onto that string. And then as the tomato grows, I just, wrap it around the string as it grows up. And this is really great because you don't have a bulky tomato cage. You're getting lots of circulation. It's really easy to prune your tomatoes. And it's just really easy. Like I actually, my garden's right next to a pergola. So I tie a bunch of strings to the top of pergola, and then I run them over my garden to my fence. And then from there, I need to take a picture of this show, but from there I tie my string, a bunch of strings off from those top, strings. Like I use clotheslines, like a heavy duty string, and then I get some, lighter, like, hemp string or something and tie it from there. And then like I have all these strings coming down from these two main lines, and I grow my tomatoes up there. And it's it looks a little weird, but it's super easy to do. I really like this structure. But a lot of times, if you're growing a lot of tomatoes in a long line, this is a really great system where you get like, two bamboos or rebar works well, and you hammer or the rebar in or put the bamboos in on each side. And then you take string and you wrap it down one end, and then you bring it back the other end. You do that a couple times, and as the tomato grows, you just make sure that tomato grows in between the strings, and then that's going to secure it really well. And that's really great for like long rows of tomatoes. And all right, and then bamboo. So if you're working with bamboo, bamboo is like the best material to use for making trellises. And so this is a great example. I was saying, like, you have these individual, stakes for each tomato, but then it gets so heavy that you might want to do some cross braces, and you kind of create some structures that's going to give it a little bit more support for your, and especially if you're growing multiple tomato plants. And so it's really good. Bamboo is really easy to work with. You tie them together, like it's called lashings. There's these technical ways you can do it, but really, like, you just get a piece of string and just run it around, like 10 different times in 10 different ways, and then just tie it tight. And that's what makes the lashing that's going to keep the bamboo together. And you can just build all kinds of different structures out of bamboo with just some string and bamboo. Get like a saw, like a pruning saw to cut the bamboo into pieces. And yeah, you could build some really fun structures with bamboo. This is that teepee structure where they're having like kids actually hang out inside. You can grow bamboo yourself. You just want to be really careful. It's like mint; it will take over. So I definitely recommend growing them in like, like a raised bed, and then we put some landscape fabric on the bottom so they can't grow out. Or like I used to grow bamboo in containers, big giant containers, and then we would harvest them. That way, we would, they wouldn't escape. But you just want to be really careful, because if they do escape, you're going to have a bamboo problem for a really long time. This makes a really great windbreak. If you're looking for like a windbreak for your garden, it's just making like a what do you call that? A wicker kind of fencing, and that's going to break up a wind enough, where you can plant inside really well. Here's the question. Where do you get bamboo? So I have a couple people I go to that I just found on local listservs. Like, you go on local listservs, Nextdoor, Craigslist, there's always going to be somebody being like, especially in the summer, then like, I have this, terrible bamboo problem. Can someone come and harvest them? And I have a couple people I go to, and like this one person just has massive bamboo, so they're really thicker stuff. I mean, really thicker stuff. The thicker it is, the bigger and better structures you can build. It gets really fun when you find stuff that's like, 2 or 3, 4 inches diameter. You can build some really awesome structures with that. But you really just kind of have to like, you have to keep your eye out on local listservs and try to find somebody that has one. But if you find somebody, I mean, you can go back there every year because that bamboo is just impossible to get rid of. But you can also buy bamboo if you can't find it. You can buy it at stores, garden stores and stuff. And when you pre-made, cut, bamboo pieces. Yeah, and then yeah, that's the only places I know. Yeah, I mean, you just got to ask the people about which ones are thicker and thinner ones. There's a couple places. Yeah, I mean, you could find. There's definitely some places in DC that have real thick, bamboo areas. You just kind of have to kind of find them. Is there a special pruning blade for a reciprocal saw? If I was using a reciprocal saw, which is a sawzall, I would probably use yeah, the wood blade. It's got thicker teeth. As opposed to the metal blade. But I think pruning saws just make nice, neat cuts. You just want to be careful because I mean, if you don't cut it right, it'll get splintery and stuff. A lot of times, I mean, if you have a machete, machetes work really well as because not only do you cut it down, but you can use that machete to really quickly cut off all the side branches and lateral branches and stuff. But yeah, I think pruning saws are the easiest way to cut up bamboos. All right. So here's some examples of some heavy, so trellises that can deal with some heavier things like melons. So melons are really fantastic to get on the ground because some of these melons, like watermelons, could take up like a watermelon patch could literally be like 10 feet by 10 feet. It could take up a huge amount of space. But if you get it off the ground and trellis it, then it's only taking up a small little space. But some of these bigger melons, I mean, they're going to eventually fall off if they're not resting on the ground. So it's good to like, kind of create these little hammocks for them, like pantyhose or something like that. A breathable cloth, like squashes. They make you could buy squash netting and you can make that with like metal, fittings and stuff or wood fittings, and then just giving it this big thing. This is great for like cucumbers and zucchinis and stuff. Will love just growing along this netting. Um, then yeah, and just like different kinds of like using that concrete remesh to make like tunnels that you can grow plants up and over the tunnels and stuff. And this I really like, it's like a pergola. Someone grew squashes on top and then in there supporting them with pantyhose on the bottom. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff you can do with trellises. And then so moving on from trellises, there's also other structures that you may want to think about doing, such as like shade cloth structures. So the whole point of this is if you want to grow, if you want to grow cool weather crops in the summer, you can usually get away with growing a lot of cool weather things by giving it some kind of partial shade. You don't want to completely shade it. It still needs sun to grow. But you can get this shade cloth, 30 to 50% level from a nursery. You can make these different hoops. We have a whole carpentry course that talks about a 2-hour recorded class that if you want to look on to all the different ways that you can make hoops, you can just get PVC to bend it. You get wire gauges, or you can get conduit. You have to have a special bender for conduit. But you can make these little structures, or just like stakes and stuff, and you just tie the shade cloth over them. So this person's growing, looks like different kinds of lettuces and stuff, and over the summer, and they're just giving it a little bit of shade cloth, and that should, as long as you're still watering really well, you should be able to get grow a lot of cool weather stuff all summer long doing this. Like I said, it's not going to taste as good, but it's still going to be pretty good in the cool weather. Or just like I really like this like intercropping. So this is a great example of like this person's growing these tomatoes, but the tomatoes it's going to take a month or two for them to like kind of take up all the space. So in the meantime, they're planting rows of fast growing lettuce in between the tomatoes. So they'll probably harvest all these lettuce before the tomatoes mature and get big enough to take up all the space. So that's called intercropping. Intercropping is a really fun concept. It's not really a beginner thing, so I didn't include it on this presentation, but it's all about understanding like how to pair quick growing things and slow growing things, and how to like grow a bunch of radishes around your cabbages, because cabbage takes months to take up their whole space. But so in the meantime, you can grow like radishes and quick growing things before the cabbage gets big enough to grow. So it's a lot. You can it's a big rabbit hole with intercropping of things you could do. Yeah, so towards the end, so if you remind me, someone asked if they could provide the website with a list of classes. So towards the end, I'm going to post the website. And there was something else I already forgot. But there was another wet thing I was going to post to. But if anyone remembers what the other thing I was going to post on, but it's just once I have to like take down this presentation and then repost it, everything. So but yeah, again, I will definitely post the website with all the classes towards the end of the presentation. And then row covers. So this is you don't need to start off with this stuff, but it's a good thing to know if you do have really bad pest issues and pest problems. So row covers are basically these cloth covers. You use them for two different things. In the summer, you use them as like pest protection to kind of like protect your plants against pests. And then says please post presentation again. Okay, sorry. So here's the link to the presentations. So you can either use them as summer, crop protection, or you can use them in the winter to kind of protect against like frost and harsh winds if you're doing a winter garden. But a lot of times, like I said, I don't recommend starting out with this stuff, But if you have a really bad pest problem, the next year or the next season, I would think about investing in some of this stuff. You can get them from like Johnny Seed Select, and idea when you're doing pest summer stuff, you want to look for things that are actually labeled pest covers or really low grade and that allows a lot of sunlight to get in and it's really breathable. And you could do one thing's called like floating covers, where you actually when you're planting seeding things or small baby plants, you can actually just throw the cover over it and then weigh it down with rocks, and that would prevent like different especially like cabbage loopers. They're the little worms that eat all your brassicas, like your kale and collards. So they appear in the spring as this white fly and deposit their eggs in the soil, and then they come out. But if there's like a cloth over them, they're not going to deposit their eggs, and then you don't have to worry about that insect all year long. But when it gets bigger, then you need to build some of these hoops to allow give it room for your plants to grow. And then you want to take it off when things are flowering, so you want to let pollinators in to actually do the pollination and things like that. So a couple questions. My biggest pest is squirrels eat things up. Yeah, we're gonna have a slide on mammal pests coming up here soon. Row covers won't help with the squirrels. I have a couple good solutions for squirrels I'll talk about in a second. Just do a quick little rundown of bad bugs and good bugs. So this slide is bad bugs. So these some of them are worse than others. Like this is one of the worst. This is that cabbage looper I was talking about. They comes as a white. If you ever see this white fly flying around, it's like the size of maybe a dime or smaller. Spend the next 20 minutes tracking that guy down and killing him. Because he's a cabbage looper fly, and he's going to deposit his eggs on all brassicas, cabbage, kale, collards, and then these little inchworms come out, and then they devastate your plants. But the best thing to do with these guys is the best thing to do with all pests is just like every time you go out to water, spend like 5 minutes just walking around your garden, checking on the bottom of all your leaves and just squishing, bugs. And if you can find the eggs, even better. If you can find the eggs first, squish those eggs. Or if you don't like squishing things, you just have a little cup of soapy water and just knock all the bugs into that soapy water. You can also use like neem oil, BT. It's like this bacteria. It's probiotic it's bacteria that you spray on, and it eats like all worms and stuff. Works really well. Slugs, like beer traps work really well with slugs. They're just coming out at night with a headlamp. Aphids, these little like sap suckers, they suck out the nutrients and saps. There's two kinds of pests. There's ones that chew and there's ones that suck. So that's good to know. Like slugs and cabbage loopers, they chew, so they'll have like chew marks. So that's easy to identify. But then aphids, you'll just see discoloration and things like that. But aphids, neem oil works really well. Neem is this organic spray. It's from a neem tree that's in it's like I think it's from India or somewhere around that area. You could spray that, once a week, and that will take out most of these guys. Or just like a high power water hose. And you spray them. We'll wash them off and take them out. But really, like also attracting beneficial insects like ladybugs, just massacre aphids. So if you can get trap a couple ladybugs with some of your native flowers and herbs, they'll take care of themselves. If you ever have some leaves that look like someone shot them with a shotgun, these are leaf miners. They're little, microscopic, oh no, they're not leaf miners. I wrote, they're flea beetles. I'm sorry. So let me make a note to fix that. Um, so these are flea beetles. So they're little tiny fleas that eat. They love eggplants. So that's why with eggplants, I really recommend the best thing you can do is don't plant your eggplant if you're growing it yourself. Wait, grow it really big and healthy in your basement before transplanting it. Or when you go buy eggplants, look for big size eggplants because they usually don't kill eggplants unless it's a little baby seedling, and then they'll definitely kill them. But if you have a nice healthy size, eggplant, they'll usually just do this thing and then they'll move on. You could spray neem oil will help with this, but I usually don't do anything with these guys. They usually don't kill the plants. And then the leaf miners are, if you ever have this weird looking path, that's because you've got these little bugs that's in between the layers of the leaf carving out. So if you see that, just pull the whole leaf out and throw it in the trash. Don't compost it because they may survive the compost. So these are the bugs that come out, April, May, June, but you may have these guys throughout the year, but they start emerging in the spring. And then we have a new set of bugs that start appearing around May or June. And you may have these all year long too, but they won't start emerging to the weather gets warmer. So a couple things to keep out, like Japanese beetles, they usually don't do any. They're more of a fruit tree problem. They usually don't, eat up veggies. But if you do have these guys, well, a lot of times when you're digging in the soil, you'll see these white grubs. These are Japanese beetle grubs. So if you ever see these, just pull them out and throw them into the grass, like a bird will eat them or whatever, because they will eventually hatch and they'll defoliate fruit trees and things like that. So these guys are the worst, cucumber beetles. They don't do much damage, but they have this like really bad bacterial blight in their stomach. So if you ever have a beautiful cucumber plant that just dies all of a sudden, it's because of these guys. They transfer this bacterial wilt that will kill a cucumber in a couple of days, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's really important. They look like ladybugs, but they're yellow. There are no yellow ladybugs. If you see a ladybug that's yellow, that's a cucumber beetle, and you want to spend like the next 10 minutes stalking that thing and killing it because they can wreak some serious havoc. And this is what their eggs look like. Harlequin beetles they love brassicas and things like that. They're really easy to see their eggs. Their eggs look like striped mini kegs that will be like perfectly symmetrically laid. So if you can find those underneath of a leaf, squish those guys. They'll save you some time. But these guys are easy to squish or to knock into soapy water. White flies, it looks like a bunch of mold, but then if you shake it or something, you'll have flies around. Neem oil works well with white flies, or spraying a high power water. Tomato hornworm, these guys will devastate your tomato plant in a couple of days. But they're really easy to see and really easy to find, and you can squish them unless they have these like little white. I'll show you a picture of what they look like. If they have little white sacs on them, that's eggs from a parasitic wasp. So leave that there because they'll die real soon, and then a bunch of parasitic wasps, which are super microscopic. Or not micro. They're super small. They don't attack people, but they'll fly around and start killing other tomato hornworms and things like that. Squash bugs, same with Harlequin beetle. Squish them or knock them into soap water. Squash vine borers. These guys are the worst. If you ever have a big section of squash that just kind of dies all of a sudden, a lot of times it's check the base, and if there's some holes like this, that means there's this little maggot guy that it's basically just squash plants. The stems are hollow, and he's just like working his way up the stems, like eating, and he's going to kill your plant. So what you can do is you get like a really sharp knife or a box cutter and just start opening it up until you find them, and then squish them, and then bury that whole area that you just opened up in wet soil. And the hope is like it will become a root ball eventually. But a lot of times, they die anyway, so it stinks. Oh, cool. So yeah, someone posted the University of Maryland, the free straw contact info. Um, and then we have ants farming and aphids on a grapevine. Yeah, it's so cool. And so ants, those aphids, they'll suck up the nutrients from a leaf, and then they kind of they poop or whatever this sugar water that comes out in these like droplets, and ants will actually farm them. They'll corral them into one area. They'll protect them. They'll fight off ladybugs, and then they'll drink all the sugar water that comes out of them. So it's pretty cool. But at the same time, they're gonna they're yeah, they're protecting these aphids as well against the ladybugs. So yeah, and I found that cinnamon works really well. If you have an ant problem in your gardens, you know, sprinkling a bunch of cinnamon in your garden will get your ants, you know, away. And then you have some good bugs. So this is really good to like kind of keep an eye out for these guys because you don't want to squish these guys because these guys will eat up all your bad bugs. You know, this is that tomato worm. These are these predatory wasp egg sacs. So if you ever see a tomato hornworm and it's got these sacs, don't just leave them because he'll die right away. And then they'll. It's really awful. It's like have you ever seen that clip from the alien when that alien pops out of that person's stomach? They got the idea from this. The little baby wasps, you know, hatch inside the hornworm and just eat his insides and then fly out, and then they lay eggs into other tomato hornworms. So it's a brutal way to go. But you know, assassin bugs. If you see these guys, they you know they devour like bad insects. Ground beetles are really great. This so ladybug. So everyone's familiar with what a ladybug looks like as an adult, but they have different stages, and it's important to keep an eye out, especially the larva stage. The larva stage. I mean, these guys are just like monsters. They just destroy aphids. So you definitely, if you see something that looking like this, or something that kind of looks like a ladybug, but you know, like maybe a ladybug on steroids, leave that as well because they'll eat up all kinds of aphids. And definitely keep an eye out for eggs that look like these, and don't squish those. You know, centipedes are great, spiders are great. You know, even though people are creeped out by spiders, they do a really great job eating mosquitoes and all kinds of pests and stuff. So leave your spiders. Lace wings. So lace wings is like the best. You know, they call them beneficial bugs. Like in nurseries and stuff in greenhouses will order lace wings because they do so well. So the fly doesn't. It doesn't. I don't even think it has a mouth. It doesn't eat anything, but it'll lay these eggs that'll look like they're just hanging off of these little stems. If you ever see this, don't squish these guys. And then the larva stage is just it's very similar to the ladybug larva, and they'll just they'll just devour different kinds of bugs. So they'll just devour like especially like cabbage loopers and things like that. So it's really great pest. All right, mammals. So we have a whole 2-hour presentation on how to deal with mammals. So definitely check that out if you want to, you know. But I just wrote in. I'm just going to go over a couple. I mean, there's a lot of information. I apologize, but I'm just going to talk about a couple different, you know, tips to deal with, like mainly squirrels, deer, you know, rats, birds, moles, and voles and stuff. And so the best thing, like for deer, the best thing you could do is these laser sensor water sprays. They're like $30 or $40. You could attach them to, you know, hose, or you could buy ones that are solar power. But they have this little laser, and so if you know if a deer is coming in this area, you set this up, and then when the deer crosses over, it will spray the deer real quick with a thing of water, and just scares the heck out of the deer, and the deer will not come back. So these work really well with deer. You'll spray yourself and your dog and stuff, but people that use this have deer problems, like are you know, like have nothing but like good things to say. Squirrels, a lot of times, if you ever have like tomatoes and they just like a bunch of tomatoes on the ground and it's just like a little hole out of them, those are squirrels. It's not just tomatoes, like you know, anything that's like juicy, like peaches and stuff. And it's so frustrating because they're not even eating it. But in reality, that this happens a lot in the summer. And many of the time, the squirrels they just want the water. So they just open it up a little bit and drink some water and then throw it aside. So if you give them, you know, a water dish or some kind of bird bath or something like that, a lot of times that will decrease it. And also, like with squirrels, I mean, the squirrels will devastate your crops. But a lot of times, I have a lot of success with doing like squirrel feeders. like you put up a couple squirrel feeders, at least like 20 feet or so from your garden, and keep it full with seeds and stuff. They're gonna eat that instead of eating your garden. You gotta keep it full, because once if you don't, and once they eat it all, they could come and eat your garden. A lot of times, like yeah, like using like fencing, cattle fencing and stuff like that with these T-posts are really easy to like keep deer out. Or if you have like groundhogs or things that dig burrow holes, you can actually, just bury some of your fencing into the, trench and bury it like a foot in the ground. That'll keep a groundhog from going. A lot of times if you have holes, it depends on the size of the hole will tell you what it is. Like you have a really small holes, a lot of that's like carpentry bees, like less than an inch, so that's nothing to worry about. But then voles and moles are like 1 to 2 inches. And what works really great with them is getting like a peppermint, what you call the essence or the liquid peppermints. Drop and put a couple drops in their holes, and it's just so pungent that that'll drive them away. Rats, if the holes are 2 to 4 inches, then that could be a rat. And you want to be really careful. I mean, rats, a lot of people, there's this misperception that gardens attract rats, and they don't attract rats. Rats are already here. They're attracted to like rotting smells. That's why you'll see them in dumpsters and things like that. So if you have a bad compost bin, or if you let fruit rot on the ground, that could attract them. And while they're there, they might eat your like tomatoes and stuff. Or if your garden's close to a dumpster, you may have some rat issues. So you may want to think about like remediating those issues before you build a garden. But a lot of times, but when you do, if they do attract them, you just want to act really fast. Which the easiest way is just like call exterminator. They'll work with you on whatever, if you don't want to do poisons and things. There's a lot of luck with a lot of people are having luck with getting dry ice. You can get dry ice from like like a liquor store. And you put that dry ice in the hole, and it actually fills the hole up with carbon dioxide, and that usually takes them out. So a lot of people are having a lot of luck with that stuff, or like rat terriers and stuff. Like I've heard a lot of success stories with that. Yeah, it's important to understand, like, because that's your garden isn't trapped in rats. But if you're gardening in an area that already has rats, like it's next to a dumpster, you may have some. And then groundhogs. If it's a big hole, it's going to be a groundhog. And you can get like, these have-a-hearts. If you don't want to kill them, you can get these have-a-heart cages. You just got to check these cages every day. Because if they get trapped in that cage, and they're going to, if you don't take them somewhere, they're going to have a heart attack. So it's like, what's the point of like spending all this money for this humane cage? So there's a lot of great things, like, like if you have a local barbershop, if you get their hair and spread that hair around the garden, that keeps a lot of animals away, like different scents, like predator urines, which is like synthetic, made in the lab. Everyone always asks, like, how do they get this urine from these predators? But it's lab made. Pepper sprays, you make different kinds of hot pepper sprays and stuff. That will keep squirrels away, but you just got to reapply it a lot. Like putting like dogs and scarecrows and stuff. Snakes, like rubber snakes, will keep birds away. If you're having bird issues, putting a bunch of rubber snakes in the garden. So there's a lot of different things you could do, from like scaring them, to keeping them, repelling them, to just distracting them, like feeding them elsewhere. Like bird feeders. If you're having bird issues, put a couple bird feeders away from your garden, and hopefully they'll go to those birds, those feeders. So. But like I said, I mean, there's a whole presentation of just the different tips on what to do. A big thing though is like actually building, cages. Let's say all these things aren't working, and they're still getting into your garden, so you can actually build cages out of like we use like hardware cloth. It's like super duper chicken wire, because I've seen like rats just run right through chicken wire. Chicken wire is good for chickens. It's not good for like rats or squirrels. So a lot of people like, they'll build these little, 2x4s, these little, cages on top, on hinges, and you can even lock them if you're having problems with theft. And that, is great for strawberry plants and herbs and stuff. And then you can make them bigger, like hoops, and even like bigger than, I've seen people like make these big cages, and then they have doors that open up so they can harvest, and things like that. So you can get creative. Check out our carpentry class, and we talk about a lot of different ideas to do. So a couple questions. Woodchucks. I don't really know much about woodchucks. I mean, I'm sure you can probably have a heart them, but with a have a heart cages if you want to capture them. But yeah, sorry, I don't know much. Skunks, squirrels, and rabbits. I don't know too much about skunks either. Sorry. And rabbits. Rabbits, I would do same things that you would do with squirrels, like hot pepper sprays and things like that. And these cages work really well. If you're ever in doubt, you could build, some of these cages. That will help out a lot. So feeding squirrels doesn't attract more squirrels. So yeah, this is like the dilemma. But most squirrels, they live in very territorial families. So you'll only have like one family of squirrels in their area. And that's a problem with a lot of habit heart cages. You'll capture them and take them elsewhere, and then the new family will kind of come in. That's why you see a lot of squirrels fighting each other because they're territorial. But the idea is if you can keep that one family fed, it's not going to attract more families. But that's always the issue, though, that you may attract more things. But that's why you want to feed them like at least 20 feet or so away from your garden. You don't want to and then if you do find that you're attracting more, definitely stop that. So, but cool. All right. So weeds. I'm not going to go too much into it. I just want to give a slide of just like what different weeds look like that you're going to find in your garden. These are good ones to kind of, it's good to kind of identify these. Whenever things come up in your garden, take a picture and try to identify what they are. So this is a good, I just want to include this as a reference point for different things that you want to pull. And then there's a lot of good weeds. There's a lot of edible weeds in your garden. And some of the healthiest things in your garden are actually your weeds. Like purslane, it's like a succulent that grows in the summer. It's got the highest level of omega-3 fatty acids than any plant I've ever seen. Like lamb's quarters, like super healthy, like spinach, like dandelions. It's pretty bitter, but you can eat the leaves. There's a big woody area in the root that you can eat. Wood sorrel. It's it's kind of like sour kind of clover that you can eat. Weed and dead nettle, they make really great pestos and things like that. So there's it's not just like so some of these you may want to leave or maybe you want to like harvest over time, but you just want to be careful. Don't harvest this stuff if it's been like it's in an area that you don't know about, or it's like dogs are peeing on them or things like that. So you just want to be a little careful. All right, so the last section is going to be about harvesting. So this is going to be the last 10 minutes. I'll probably go over a little bit, but feel free to jump off if you need to. So let's say you grow these things, and now you need to understand like different techniques to actually maximize your harvest and actually harvest them as best as possible. So a lot of these things, I always see people like somebody will have like kale that's ready to harvest, and they'll just pull the whole plant, which is so devastating because if you know how to harvest kale, you can harvest kale for months, and you can get so much more if you just if you don't harvest it all at once. So for like your large leaf plants like kale, collards, and chard, those you can just harvest a little bit at a time, and they'll keep on growing. So like collards and kale, you want to harvest from the bottom. Like the bigger leaves are on the bottom, and you can harvest up to like a third to the half of the plant at a time. And what you do with these things, you just snap them back. You just kind of, with your hand, you don't need like pruners. You just snap downward and backward, and they'll just come right off, and they'll leave a little nubby area. And you can keep on doing that. And idea is you kind of create your collards and your kale into like palm trees. And then a lot of times, you can keep on doing that for months. You can, and like I've seen some people, they'll have like 4 or 5 feet tall kale plants. Especially particularly if you can give them a little bit of shade over the summer and keep them watered, they'll keep on growing, and then they'll just harvest them all year long. Chard's very similar, but it's instead of on the bottom, it's the outside leaves. You want to harvest the outside leaves first, and you can snap these back. They're a little bit more difficult. You can also prune them off. But you want to harvest, again, up to a third to the half of the plant, and you want to leave at least a half a plant inside, and it'll just keep on growing, for many months. Cut and come again. So these are the cut leaves. Like if you're doing like lettuce mixes and spinach and things like that, you just you even after you space them out, they just come in really thick. Like and then the idea is you grab a handful of them and you cut at the base, but you leave like an inch or so. And then that will regrow 1 or 2 more times. So you'll be able to get a couple more harvests out of these greens. Same with like lettuce heads, like bok choy and stuff. You can pull the whole thing out if you want, or you can cut it on the base and do cut and come again, and it will grow back. A smaller version will grow back, hopefully, and some people will harvest this stuff individually as well. They'll kind of, if you do that, you just want to harvest the big leaves first, with like bok choys and pak choys. And then, like we talked about harvesting by thinning, you can slowly thin things out over time and eat them as microgreens while you're slowly spacing them out. Right. So broccoli and Brussels sprouts. So if you're harvesting Brussels sprouts, um, the idea with Brussels sprouts is Brussels sprouts are big, but the leaves are very similar to collards. So the idea is like you want to actually kind of treat it like a collard plant, and you want to start harvesting the bottom leaves first and start opening it up, and that's going to bring more circulation and it's going to allow the Brussels sprouts to actually grow to full size. So you want to start, you don't want to take more than like a half a plant off, at a time, but you want to start, like once a week, do a small, collard harvest. And then that opens up the bottom, and then the Brussels sprouts will start maturing. And then once they get about 2 inches bit, in diameter, you can start pulling them off. Problem is they harvest, from the bottom first, and it takes a while, so you really only get like a handful at a time. But if you want, what the farms do, if you want to harvest all of them at once, is they'll the farms, they'll take a machete or a sharp knife, and they'll cut off, they'll hack off the top of the plant, like the top 6 inches, and that really freaks out the whole plant. And then they'll send rush all these like energy to finishing off the Brussels sprouts, and then they'll have all the Brussels sprouts will be ready at once. And same with broccoli. Broccoli, you're basically waiting for all the floral tips to be about the size of a matchstick, and then once they're about the size of a matchstick, you want to go ahead and harvest that, because if you wait too long, each one of these is a mini flower, and they'll flower, and then you can't harvest them. And you usually get one head on the top, and then sometimes there'll be a couple more on the bottom that will appear after you cut off the first one. But what's great about broccoli is you can eat any part of the plant. The stalks are really good if you like, pull off the outer hard layer, and the inner tender layer is like, it's like a water chestnut kind of nutty taste to it. The leaves you can saute the leaves and roast them and things like that. They're very similar to collards. Melons. There's a lot of different ways to figure out if melons are ripe or not. Like especially watermelons. The biggest one is that they'll have these little branch on the right where it's connected that will start twirling like this, and that's a good indicator that the melon is ripe. A lot of it's going to be colors. The color will get duller. The yellow part that's touching the ground will get more of a creamy, darker yellow. But the main thing about these melons is you just want to try one, and then if it's ripe, great, go harvest the rest. If it's not, that's a good indicator, and then wait to harvest the rest. You want to cut them off with a knife. Other melons, like you just got to research it, but like cantaloupe, sometimes it has smells to them, or the outside pattern, the webbing pattern on the rind will be more defined, or they'll fall off, or colors or stuff. So you just have to do some research with melons. Eggplants, you want to get them when they're still shiny. Research how big these eggplants are going to get, and once they reach that 5 inches or whatever, and they're still shiny, you want to go ahead and harvest them. You don't want to wait too long, because when they get dull, they get really woolly, and it's no good. You want to use a sharp knife or pruner to harvest eggplant as well. Someone asked if I have broccoli stalks, could I replant it? I don't think they replant very well. I don't think so. But yeah, definitely eat those broccoli stalks. You can saute them, or just like peel the outside layer and eat them raw. Can you eat those Brussels sprout leaves? Yeah, Brussels sprout leaves are like collards. They're real delicious. Peas and beans and potatoes. So peas and beans, again, research your variety and what it looks like when it gets mature. Most of the time, you want to harvest them when you can see the beans, but not when it's like completely bulging completely. You want to get them a little early. But the most important part is you want to harvest them just right. You don't want to yank them off. You want to either cut them with a pruner, or you do this thumb trick where you put your thumb up to the base of it, and you push inward and upward, and it just snaps right off. And if you do that, it really stimulates a lot more fruit production, and you'll get a lot more beans and peas. And then potatoes, basically for potatoes, you're just waiting for the tops to die down and fall over. And at that point, you get like a garden fork or pitchfork. You loosen up the soil. and then very carefully you pull the vines out, and then just kind of very carefully, put your hands through and sift out and find all the potatoes. It's a really fun activity for kids. Throw away any green potatoes because they'll make you sick. Okra, you want to harvest that. You want when it's 2 to 4 inches. If it gets any bigger than that, it's going to get woody. So you really got to be on top of your game, like when you're growing okra, and you need to go out there like almost daily to check them because they'll grow faster than 4 inches real quick. You want to use a knife, or pruners to cut that off. Corn, you want to wait for the silks to turn brown, and then you can even open it up a little bit. If you pop a kernel, and if it's if water comes out, it's not ripe. But if more milky substance comes out, it's good and ripe. Um, so someone's saying they're having trouble with audio. If you're having trouble, I'll just type if you're having trouble with audio, you may have to watch the recording. All right, peppers and cucumbers. So peppers, a lot of times, what kind of pepper you're going for is basically when you harvest them. Most peppers, I mean, you can get certain varieties that are more prone to be green or more prone to be red, but most peppers will start out green, and they'll turn yellow, orange, and then red. And green is like more savory pepper, and then red is like the sweetest pepper. And that's same true with hot peppers. A lot of times, like they may skip yellow and orange, but like jalapenos will start out green and then they'll turn red, and red is when they're much hotter. So like more closer they are to red, they're either more sweeter or they're more spicy. Cucumbers, you want to do your research, figure out how big your cucumbers are going to get, whether it's like 6 or 8 inches or dill, where it's just smaller, and then you want to cut them off before they turn yellow. Once they turn yellow, they get woody, and it's not very good. Summer squash and winter squash. So most summer squash are bush-like. There are like vine varieties, but typically most of them are bush-like. Zucchini, yellow, patty pan. So you want to actually get these while the rinds are still soft, so you can actually break the skin with your finger. And these things, you can harvest them all summer long. As opposed to winter squash, like your butternut, acorn, pumpkin. These you want to actually wait for the rinds to get hard, where you can't puncture them. And these all ripen at once in the fall. So that's why you don't have pumpkin patches all summer long. You have pumpkin patches in the fall because they all ripen, all at once. Root crops. A lot of times we can tell about root crops by the diameter of the tops. If so like carrots and stuff. I mean, you can see the diameter, and some of these root crops will get 2, 3, 4 inches in diameter. That's why you want to space them out really well. And like radishes, you can start pulling radishes when they're like not even an inch. But everything else, you want to wait till they're about 1 to 2 inches to start pulling them out. And you can pull them out as needed. You can leave them in the ground. They're fine. They're not going to rot in the ground. The main thing is you want to be careful with beets and turnips. So beets and turnips, they'll actually, if they get bigger than like 2 or 3 inches, they'll start getting really woody. So you want to harvest those guys before they get too big. And then a lot like beet tops and stuff, you can, when you harvest them, cut those beet tops off. And turnips, they're like spinach, like they're really delicious. So someone says I tried carrots and beets, but only got skinny roots. That might have been maybe they weren't spaced out enough. Like carrots, you really need to give them about 2 inches or so to space out so they can actually properly grow. Or it just might be like maybe the soil wasn't tilled enough, or yeah. So planting and harvesting onions. So as I was saying, you don't really want to plant onions by seed. It just takes a really long time. You want to buy either these bunches or these bulbs. And then basically, decide, do you want to have like spring green onions that don't have bulbs? They're more mainly for an herb. Or do you want to have small bulbs or big bulbs? Because that's going to dictate how much you space them. If you're doing spring onions, you could just space them 1 inch apart. But if you want big, large bulbs, you need to give them 4 inches apart. And then, so these things, these spring onions and green onions, you would harvest in the spring, or early summer. And but these large bulbs, you have to wait till the end of the summer to really get the decent size. I would really recommend like small bulbs and scallions. It's hard to get large onions harvested. And then garlic. If you're wanting to plant garlic, so garlic's got a really weird season. So you plant it actually in October, and then you just pull apart. You can get these cloves. I recommend getting them from farmers markets, or ordering them from seed companies, because a lot of grocery store garlic, it may be sprayed with something that will prevent it from germinating. But you break it apart. You put them right side up. Space them out like 4 inches or so. Cover them in the trench. Mulch them, water them really well. And then they should pop up a little bit in the fall, but sometimes they don't always. But then they'll pop up definitely by spring. And you keep them mulched, you water them, and then they'll try to flower in late May. They'll send like a bolt, it's called garlic scape. These are really delicious. I usually wait till after the first, circle, and then I'll cut them off of the base. If you wait too long, they'll get really woody. But that's really delicious. You can snap or cut them off. But then in late June, early July is when garlic's ready, and the bottom half will be brown, and that's a good indicator that they're ready to be harvested. Curing plants, so not everything you can pull out of the ground is ready to be eating. Yeah, like sweet potatoes. When you pull them straight out, they're mainly just starch. You got to cure them to get that to release a lot of sugars. You could either do that by like creating like a human environment, like putting them over a tarp over them and letting them get the hot in the sun. That will help it out. But it's hard to replicate a human environment because they're tropical plants. That's how they've been designed. But a lot of times you could just keep them in a bucket in the basement for a couple months, and over time the starches will convert to sugars. And then like try one out first before you start eating them all. Onions, and garlic. If you want to store them for a while, you need to dry them out a little bit. Like onions, you sun dry them for a couple days, and then you just let them hang out in your basement or someplace cool and dry for a couple weeks, and until like the tops basically are dry off, and you can snap them off. Garlic, you want to hang them in bunches for like on your tool shed for like a week or two. That will harden the skins off, so they'll last a lot longer. And tomatoes, I mean, we all know, like, when tomatoes ripe, it's just like bursting. It's got a great smell. It's got a great color to it. But sometimes towards the end of the summer, if you notice, like, these tomatoes just never turn red. They just stay green. That's because tomatoes need a lot of heat and a lot of sunlight to ripen their tomatoes. So it gets harder and harder as the sunlight and heat decreases in the fall. So some things you could help out is you could pinch off all the blossoms and stuff, and that will help push nutrients to ripen. But a lot of times, if you just like if a frost is coming, you can actually rip out the whole tomato plant and like hang it upside down, and then it'll like freak out and ripen all its fruit really quickly. And then herbs. So if you're harvesting herbs, there's kind of two ways to harvest. There's kind of two types of herbs that we grow. We grow ones that are either like branching, soft herbs like basil and then lemon balm, and then we grow like more woody, herbs. For the soft stuff, like basil, you want to harvest them. You want to unless you need a lot of the plant, you want to kind of harvest the tips of them. Because if you just plant one basil seed in the ground, it's just going to come up as a single stalk, and then you're not going to have a whole lot of basil. But when it comes up, if you start pinching off the top leaves, what happens is there's these little dormant buds, kind of like suckers in tomatoes. You pinch that off, and then they start growing. So one branch, suddenly becomes 2 branches, and then you have 2 branches, and then you pinch those top ones off the next round of leaves, and then you have 4 branches, and you pinch that off, and you have 16 branches. And the idea is you want to create like a basil bush that's going to have lots of basil instead of just letting one single stalk grow. And then with like rosemary and dill, so these are all perennial, more woodier plants. You can't really pinch off, like basil, but you need to get some pruners. And the idea is like whenever you want some, just cut off a branch. You never want to harvest more. You want to leave at least a third of the branch or at least a third of the plant, so it can keep on replenishing itself. Someone says keep basil growing inside in the winter. I guess you could. I've never actually tried it. I don't know how well it does if you want to try to make it into a perennial. All right. So that was like the second class. Here's a great reading list for if you want to kind of dive deeper into some really great gardening books. Here's some of my contact info. There was a couple things I'm going to pull up really quickly, just that I talked about throughout the class. I'll show you where the webinars are for the other classes, and I'll show you a couple of planting calendars. Yeah, let me pull those up. But if anyone has any questions, um, so question, if I have a basil plant, if I get it more bush-like, do I need to repot it to a larger pot? Basil's pretty versatile. I mean, if you want to keep it in a small pot, that's fine. If you give it a bigger pot, it'll be healthier and you'll get more basil. But it's fine if you want to keep it in a small pot as well. It just won't. Let's see. I want to pull up the webinar page real quick, and I'll try. Let me try to find it. And let me see if I can find a planting calendar. Okay, cool. Share this real. So two things that we talked about. Just a second. So this is one. So this is a planting calendar the university did, and this kind of helps you understand like when things need to get planted and when they need to be seeded indoors, yellow, or when they need to be planted in the ground. So there's a lot of calendars like these. University of Maryland does a good one. Aussie, our school garden folks, does one. So definitely that can help you kind of like figure out when you if you're more of a visual learner, this can help you kind of understand when you plant things in the ground. Um, and then this is a Doug network. If you're ever looking for garden supplies, where to buy seedlings, particularly in this time of COVID, where to get compost, things like that, organizations to work with. There's over 500 different like garden and food security organizations like categorized in this website. It's a volunteer resource hub. This is where we're sticking all of our webinars. So if you want to capture, this is our spring 12 class series. Each one of these, you can capture, you can see what's the table of contents, and each one has been recorded. And then we'll also post the recordings for this class. And then also we have this summer we're doing an advanced gardening course for like foraging and hydroponics and things like that. We'll be posting most of the videos on this site as well. All right. So I don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm gonna see if anyone's got any last, quick questions, real quick. I'm going to have to actually head off in a couple minutes, but the let's see, a couple questions. I used a green onion stalk and replanted it. It has started growing. How do I know it's ready to sprout? And does it produce more seeds? I'm not really sure. Send me the picture of that, and I can definitely help you out on that. Speaking of compost, I'm picking up some free compost from a neighbor found on Nextdoor. I suggest joining Nextdoor, looking through the garden group if you're looking for seeds. Yeah, for sure. Nextdoor is a great place to find like free extra garden supplies and stuff. So the URL for the garden webinar, I'm just posting that, and the URL for the so if you can grab those really quickly, because I gotta jump off in like a minute. But how long will the webinars be online? We'll keep them online for a long time. We're probably going to be a permanent resource, but yeah, it should be good for a while. Cool. Thank you all so much. Sorry, I gotta jump. I got a kid I deal with, and we're already 15 minutes over. But thank you all so much. I'll have this webinar up online probably by tomorrow. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Join us for the Wednesday Q&A sessions. And then next week is when all of our Advanced Growing Summer Series starts. So if you want to get more information or you have trouble with registration, send me an email. But thank you all so much. Sorry I can't stick around. I got a bolt, but you guys are great. And stay safe. Thank you all.